So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got almost 30 clips on a few topics for what I think should be a good show tonight. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with my commentary between the clips. I won't have all the usual quasi-news political comedy clips this week because those shows are on break, though I will be reusing one Bill Maher clip on Ebola near the end, but as usual, I will be using clips from all the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the regular Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. I'll cover a few topics this week, though the vast majority of the clips will be on the recent U.S. airstrikes against ISIS in Iraq, which pretty much took over the news programs this morning with no coverage of immigration and no coverage of Ukraine, and actually very little coverage of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza, but since I don't have any new political comedy clips for you this week, I had to try to find my own comedy in the news shows, and the closest I could get was this glitch in the intro to NBC's Meet the Press, talking about the possible Republican impeachment of President Obama that almost sounded like one of those unnecessary censorship jokes. Unnecessary censorship jokes, as you can see over in this clip.
And impeachment talk is here in D.C. once again. Two key players in the fight over the impeachment of President Clinton, Newt Gingrich and former Clinton lawyer Greg Craig, will discuss whether the legal maneuvering against President Obama will work or whether it's all.
From NBC News in Washington,
Tel Aviv, Charlie.
Good morning, Bob. Once again.
Sorry about that little glitch of my own there over to CBS, but I don't know about you, but when I first saw that intro asking whether the legal maneuvering against President Obama will work or whether it's all blank, the first word I thought of was bullshit. But of course, when I watched the rebroadcast on MSNBC later, it turned out the word was politics, which I guess proves the premise of the whole unnecessary censorship gag that you can always get people to imagine something worse when you leave the word out. But anyway, I'm not actually going to show any clips of Greg Craig or Newt Gingrich talking about impeachment, though if you're interested, you can follow the link to the full episode of Meet the Press down in the video description. And if you do watch the whole episode, one topic you won't see discussed at all is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza, which was barely covered on any of the Sunday morning news analysis shows. So the only two clips I'm going to show on the topic of Gaza come from CBS's Face the Nation. I think I mistakenly started to show one just a second ago, or at the end of that other clip. The first one is from a reporter in Tel Aviv reporting on the Israeli side, and then there's also a reporter in Gaza City reporting more from the Palestinian perspective. But I'll start with CBS News reporter Charlie Dagada reporting from Tel Aviv on Face the Nation over here.
In Tel Aviv, Charlie.
Good morning, Bob. Once again, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated that Israel will not negotiate while under fire, and they say they have no intention of sending an Israeli delegation back to Cairo for any kind of peace talks. But he went further today, saying at no stage did Israel declare that this military offensive was over. He said it was going to take time and patience. Now, we haven't returned to the kind of intensity of more than a week ago, but the Israeli Defense Forces say that Hamas has fired something like 110 rockets from Gaza into Israel, mostly short-range rockets and mortars that are hitting the border towns, none of the long-range missiles capable of hitting Tel Aviv. But they say that Hamas broke this ceasefire even before it ran out on Friday. In return, the Israeli military has launched something like 150 airstrikes at suspected Hamas targets inside Gaza. Israel says that they have no intention of even addressing the demands of Hamas until these rockets stop, and until that happens, they have no intention of stopping these airstrikes.
Now that didn't sound very promising in terms of an end to the Israeli military action anytime soon. And on the Palestinian side, reporter Clarissa Ward actually helped answer a question I discussed in my live Q&A show last Wednesday when I was struggling to figure out exactly what the goals of Hamas are in the conflict, which I think was somewhat explained in the other CBS Face the Nation report on the Gaza conflict over in this clip.
Good morning, Bob. Well, since that ceasefire expired, we have heard a steady stream of rockets being fired by Hamas from Gaza into Israel. And Israel, of course, has been returning fire with airstrikes, with artillery. 16 Palestinians have been killed so far. Now, obviously, this bombardment is nothing like on the level that we've heard over the past few weeks, but still it has an effect. Daily life here has ground to a halt. People are staying in their homes. The streets are empty, and really there's no sense that that's going to change anytime soon, with those diplomatic talks in Cairo at a standstill and with Hamas vowing to ratchet up their attacks.
Clarissa, what can Hamas possibly hope to achieve here?
Well, Bob, at this stage, politically, Hamas cannot afford to walk away from this latest conflict without extracting some concession from the Israeli side. The people here have paid such an enormous price over the past few weeks. But what's interesting is that there is widespread support here for continuing the war, even among people who don't necessarily like Hamas. And that's really because of one major issue, the blockade on Gaza, which has been in place since 2007. Most people here saying they will do whatever it takes, even continue this war, if it means that they can somehow get that blockade lifted.
So that didn't seem very promising in terms of an end to Hamas's military action in the conflict, you know, firing rockets, and if they're going to wait for an end to the blockade. So I guess this story, unfortunately, isn't going away anytime soon, and maybe the conflict is somewhat less newsworthy, maybe? I don't really think so, and I don't really agree with the lack of Gaza coverage on most of the morning shows, which I guess in one respect puts me in agreement with radio talk show host Rush Limbaugh, because I know he labels the media the drive-by media for their lack of attention to stories. I don't know, you can tell me what you think in the comment section, because I hope to actually have some time to get a little live discussion going with you all at the end of the show based on your comments that you hopefully are posting while the show's airing live. But first, I need to show you, I think it's more than 20 clips on the topic that really caught the attention of the media this week, which was President Obama's decision to order airstrikes in Iraq against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria group, they were calling themselves ISIS, and then ISIL, which is Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, and now they're actually calling themselves IS, which is just the Islamic State. But I want to compare some of the reports from the different networks, both their, before I get to the newsmakers, like I'm going to have some clips from President Obama and some clips from some senators and representatives. But before I get to that, I want to compare the reports from the different networks, both their analysis pieces from their U.S. correspondents and then their reporting pieces from people actually in Iraq when they had them, and not everyone did have those. And I want to start with the report from ABC's Jonathan Karl from This Week with George Stephanopoulos. And Jonathan Karl was with the president on his vacation in Martha's Vineyard, where he gave this report.
Martha's Vineyard.
Overnight, the Pentagon released new information on the latest airstrikes against terrorist targets in northern Iraq. At 11:20 a.m. Eastern Time, fighter jets and drones destroyed an armored personnel carrier, threatening an Iraqi minority group. 20 minutes later, U.S. aircraft struck 3 more targets, with a follow-up strike destroying another. At 3 p.m. Eastern, the final target of the day was demolished. President Obama bluntly acknowledged there is no foreseeable end to U.S. military operations in Iraq.
I'm not going to give a particular timetable because, as I've said from the start, wherever and whenever U.S. personnel and facilities are threatened, it's my obligation, my responsibility as Commander-in-Chief, to make sure that they are protected.
A key concern, the U.S. consulate and hundreds of Americans in the city of Irbil, the capital of the Kurdish area in northern Iraq, and once thought to be Iraq's safest city, is now threatened by the Islamic militant group ISIS, fighters whose ferocity the president and his advisors had lowballed.
There is no doubt that their advance, their movement over the last several months has been more rapid than the intelligence estimates and I think the expectations of policymakers both in and outside of Iraq.
President Obama reaffirmed his promise not to send in ground troops and had this message for critics who say the U.S. would be in a better position if all U.S. troops had not been withdrawn.
The only difference would be we'd have a bunch of troops on the ground that would be vulnerable.
The U.S. is also dropping relief supplies to a minority group trapped on a mountaintop. The UN now says more than 15,000 have been rescued, but thousands are still in jeopardy. And U.S. planes are at risk, too, on these missions.
These cargo airplanes, which are not very maneuverable and do not have the same defensive capabilities that, say, a fighter jet does, have to get very low and very slow to the ground, and they have to open up the ramp, and they have to push things out, and so they're actually more vulnerable.
The president is here on Martha's Vineyard for his family vacation. He's already played a round of golf, but White House advisors say that he is closely monitoring military operations over Iraq and receiving regular briefings. He has brought key members of his national security team with him here to the Vineyard, including National Security Advisor Susan Rice.
So yeah, that was ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which was actually hosted by Martha Raddatz, who you saw at the very beginning of that clip. And that was their reporter Jonathan Karl doing their U.S. correspondent, he's their White House correspondent, analysis of what's going on in Iraq, with the president on his vacation in Martha's Vineyard. But ABC was one of the networks that also had a reporter in Iraq. They, or at least they hooked up with one. I think this guy, his name is Matt Bradley. I think he may be a Wall Street Journal reporter, but he was working with ABC's This Week, and he gave the report from Iraq that you can see over here.
Well, we have to remember that Irbil was a flourishing city that was growing economically over the last 10 years, especially in relation to Baghdad and some of these other southern cities where I am now. And it's not quite clear whether or not the Peshmerga units who are there, these Kurdish fighters, will be able to defend the city. It's come as a major, major surprise that this ragtag group of Islamist militias were able to make some serious military gains against the Peshmerga just in the last week. So it is a major concern that Irbil could fall, especially considering that these guys are only about 30 minutes away.
But you've got these airstrikes going on. You've got these stranded people on Sinjar Mountain. This is going to be a long-term commitment no matter what, it seems, from the U.S.
That's what President Obama was saying in his speech yesterday. There's no real short-term solution to this conflict. And we could say that this conflict could look like Libya, where the United States' intervention is confined just to aerial bombardments. But really, the crux of the fight is going to have to come down to the Iraqi military, which has fled in the face of the Islamic State militants over the last 2 months, and the Kurdish Peshmerga, who have really shown themselves to be outgunned and outmaneuvered by the Islamic State. They're a formidable military force, and it's going to be very hard to see how the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga are going to be able to win back some of the land that they've already taken.
So those are the two reports from ABC. One from their reporter Jonathan Karl with President Obama on his vacation in Martha's Vineyard. And then they also had a reporter in Iraq. I think he was actually in Baghdad, not in Irbil, because I'm going to show a report from Irbil later, which is the city some people are calling it Kurdistan, which isn't actually a nation, but it's the Kurdish area of Iraq, which has kind of been autonomous, and the most loyal allies of the United States throughout the whole Iraq war were these Kurds up in the north there, and they're the ones who have been really threatened by this latest military action. From those two reports, you can get the idea that what President Obama decided to do is very limited just around Irbil, where there's a U.S. consulate, to avoid like a Benghazi situation where there are up to like 1,000 Americans in Irbil at the consulate and trying to help out the Kurds. And then also because there's this humanitarian crisis, what they're calling a possible genocide, these Christians who are on this mountaintop, and I'll show a little more, they showed a little bit of that in that report. I'm going to now actually go and show a couple other of the reports, but first I want to show, given that what President Obama is doing is just limited to a few airstrikes right in the Kurdish area and not like an extensive campaign against ISIS, there are some people who are saying that he's not doing enough, and then there are actually some Democrats who are trying to make sure that it stays limited, but only over on Fox News Sunday, they came up with the idea that the only two choices are that President Obama is either doing too much or too little. Somehow it can't actually be the right amount, as you can see in the quick intro from Fox News Sunday that you can see here.
Operation. And we'll discuss whether President Obama is doing too little or too much with Senators Lindsey Graham and Ben Cardin. Plus, for a president who campaigned on getting out of Iraq, how big is this reversal of policy?
As Commander-in-Chief, I will not allow the United States to be dragged into fighting another war in Iraq.
Our Sunday group weighs in on whether Mr. Obama can limit our involvement.
So yeah, on Fox News, it's they stress the reversal of policy, and the choices are that Obama's either doing too little or too much. And I also want to show Fox News' report, which isn't that much different from the one from ABC, although I noticed their Wendell Goler reporting from Martha's Vineyard. That's all they had. They didn't actually have anyone reporting from Iraq. And the other thing, I've noticed there's this weird stylistic thing they do on Fox News where sometimes they refer to President Obama as the president, but then when they use the name Obama, they never say President Obama. They always say Mr. Obama, which, I don't know, it seems like some weird psychological game they're playing. You can tell me they do it in this clip. Wendell Goler says the president at the beginning, but then whenever he says Obama, he says Mr. Obama. And you can also compare what Fox News does with the story to what I showed from ABC after you watch this clip.
Chris, the president says there are several objectives in the Iraq campaign, and not all of them are under the control of the U.S. and its allies. The first is to defend the U.S. consulate in Irbil, where there are several hundred Marines, and to stop the attacks on refugees on Sinjar Mountain. The U.S. has conducted a number of airstrikes on ISIS forces' artillery pieces that have been firing at civilians. Mr. Obama says the military is confident it can protect the refugees, but soon enough, and likely with the help of Iraqi and Kurdish forces, they'll have to form a corridor to get tens of thousands of refugees safely off the mountain.
The next step, which is going to be complicated logistically, is how do we give safe passage for people down from the mountain, and where can we ultimately relocate them so that they are safe. That's the kind of coordination that we need to do internationally.
The president spoke with the leaders of Germany, France, and Britain about joining the effort to deliver food and water to the trapped refugees, though probably not joining the fighting. Meanwhile, he suggests, though he doesn't say so openly, Iraqi President Nouri al-Maliki needs to give up his quest for another term. Mr. Obama blames Maliki's bias against Sunnis and Kurds for fueling the ISIS rebellion. He says Iraq has made progress, naming a Kurdish president and a Sunni Speaker of Parliament, but it will need a government all Iraqis can buy into to stop driving the Sunnis to join the ISIS forces, to get them to help defeat them. Chris?
And I was glad, at least there in that Fox News clip, to see that the Fox News reporter Wendell Goler talked about the need for a political solution, because that will be another one of the controversies I'm going to show between the Democrats and the Republicans. The two big controversies are whether military action can precede a political solution, and also whether the military action should be limited or should be more extensive. And there's a real split between the two parties. You know, for those who say there's not much difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, I'll be showing you in the clips a little bit later, after I finish showing the news pieces, that there really is a split between the Republicans and the Democrats in terms of whether the strikes should be limited, and also whether they should precede a political solution, or whether military action is more important than the military. But before I get to that, I want to show NBC also only did a report from their reporter Jim Miklaszewski in the United States. They didn't have a report from anyone in Iraq. And I thought their report was a little better than the Fox News one, about the same as the ABC one, but I'll let you compare them by, here's the NBC report from their analysis, just from a reporter in the United States, on what's going on in Iraq this last week here.
But why now? When ISIS took Mosul in June, the president sent 300 American troops to support and advise the Iraqi military, but not to fight.
I think we always have to guard against mission creep. American combat troops are not going to be fighting in Iraq again.
But since then, the militants have gone on a rampage, taking Iraq's largest Christian town earlier this month, seizing the Mosul Dam, key to Iraq's infrastructure, and routing the Kurdish Peshmerga forces last week. But when thousands of Yazidi worshippers were forced to flee for their lives to the mountains with no food or water to escape the brutality, it forced the president's hand and gave him the opening he needed. Now, any U.S. military intervention would be framed in part as a humanitarian operation.
Then I believe the United States of America cannot turn a blind eye.
But saving Irbil, the Kurdish region, and the Peshmerga, the most capable military force in Iraq, was the most immediate objective.
The Iraqi security forces have, up till now, not proven themselves to be effective, despite a lot of American training, which leaves us with the Kurds.
And the Kurds have proven to be a loyal ally to the United States. Too much was at stake to let the region fall without a fight. But with no inclusive Iraqi government in place and little support from NATO allies for military action, the U.S. is going it alone in an open-ended operation.
This is going to be a long-term project.
But critics say the current U.S. strategy is all wrong.
We need to arm the Kurds and let them protect themselves and stop trying to hold together an Iraq that is already disintegrated.
And the president acknowledged Saturday that any substantial progress against ISIS may hinge on bringing them down, not just in Iraq, but in Syria as well. And while American airstrikes may keep Irbil safer, they will not stop ISIS. And even with U.S. support, the outlook may be grim for a long time to come.
So yeah, that was the report from NBC's Jim Miklaszewski from inside the United States, not a reporter actually in Iraq. And I thought it set up some of the issues pretty well, especially compared to the Fox News one. But I also want to show a couple more, the CBS one and the CNN one. Here's CBS reporter Holly Williams, actually from Irbil, which is the city in the Kurdish area that's sort of the center of this whole conflict. So I think you get some good information from Holly Williams about what's actually going on in terms of the capability of the Kurdish fighters, the Peshmerga. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
Good morning, Bob. There were 4 more U.S. airstrikes here last night targeting the armoured vehicles and trucks used by ISIS militants. And some of those militants are just 30 miles away from where we are here in the city of Irbil. Kurdish soldiers from this area are the only ones still fighting ISIS on the ground here in northern Iraq after Iraqi government soldiers abandoned their posts and ran away in June. The American airstrikes will help those Kurdish fighters in their battle against the militants. Now, ISIS captured a swath of territory across northern Iraq 2 months ago, extending the borders of what it claims is its own Islamic State. Then last week, the militants struck again, seizing 15 more towns, a military base, and Iraq's biggest dam.
Holly, could the Kurdish forces on their own defeat ISIS if they decide to move on Irbil?
Well, Bob, the Kurdish fighters tell us that they're confident that they can defend Irbil, which is their capital. But they say if they're going to push ISIS out of Iraq, then they need the U.S. to give them weapons, because they say they're relying on outdated guns, whereas the militants have American tanks and artillery that they captured from Iraqi government soldiers when they ran away 2 months ago.
So I thought that was sort of an interesting analysis of the military situation between the Kurdish Peshmerga and then the ISIS fighters. ISIS having gotten these, tanks and other military weapons. I'm going to show some video of that in just a minute. And then I've heard the Kurdish Peshmerga, which are supposedly these really good fighters, that apparently they are only like light infantry. They don't have a lot of heavy weapons, and that's why they're asking for more weapons. And there was some controversy or some conflict in the reporting I heard between different sources as to whether without U.S. airstrikes they would actually be able to hold Irbil, the city of Irbil, or not. And there's a lot of reporting that the reason Obama did this, like I said before, was to avoid like a Benghazi type situation where our consulate in Irbil gets overrun and a lot of Americans get killed. And before I get to some more about the ISIS resources, I want to show, like I said, the CNN report. And this is from another reporter on the scene talking to CNN's Candy Crowley. Her name is Anna Coren. And she actually reports that the U.S. airstrikes have already helped the Peshmerga retake some towns in the Kurdish area, and that's the only place I heard that reported. And I will talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
Well, Candy, we are hearing from U.S. Central Command that they have carried out these airstrikes on 5 separate targets over a period of about 5 hours today, taking out mortar positions as well as armoured trucks. We don't know how many of the ISIS militants they killed, but we understand that those targets were certainly eliminated. Now, this has allowed the Kurdish forces, the Peshmerga, to move in and reclaim towns that were taken by ISIS a few days ago. So these counterattacks were then launched as a result of these airstrikes, meaning that those forces have moved in and have liberated those towns that militants claimed just a few days ago, certainly boosting morale on the ground. And having spoken a short time ago to the Chief of Staff of the Kurdish president, he said the airstrikes are welcome, but we need more of them. We need this campaign to continue to get those forces to the areas they need to be to fight the ISIS militants. He described ISIS as not just an army, but a state, and a very well-funded, well-equipped state with weaponry that at this stage they cannot take on. So they're calling for the international community to arm their troops with better weaponry so that they can fight ISIS. They're saying we don't need troops on the ground, we just need the weapons. Candy.
So that's sort of confirmation of what was in the last report, that the last part there about how ISIS has these heavy weapons, but the Peshmerga Kurdish forces don't have heavy weapons, and so that's what they want. In addition to these airstrikes is heavy weapons from the United States that I don't know if that's actually going to happen. There are a couple of complications there. First of all, the Kurds are kind of not very welcome by the Turks, who are part of NATO, because there's a Kurdish population in Turkey that wants to be part of this Kurdistan thing that I've heard people talking about, which doesn't really exist, which would be like a Kurdish nation. But on the other half of this military matchup, the ISIS forces, there was some really interesting reporting that Vice News did, and the head of Vice News for Europe, I think, is his title. His name is Kevin Sutcliffe. He was over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which was being hosted this morning by Martha Raddatz, and Martha Raddatz interviewed him and showed a bunch of the Vice News video. I guess Vice News went in and spent some time at the headquarters of ISIS in Syria. What's the name of the Syrian town? Something begins with an R. I'm sure it'll show up in the first clip, hopefully, from Kevin Sutcliffe talking to Martha Raddatz about how ISIS has grown so strong in Syria recently, over in this clip.
Well, less than a year ago, when Vice News started covering the whole issue of Syria, ISIS, as they were then, were one of the small factions fighting other Islamic factions, and they were just in the mix in the civil war in Syria. They've professionalised, they've added a command and control structure, they are an army now, and you can see the way they swept across into Iraq, dissolving the border and establishing the caliphate, that this is a force to be reckoned with. They've now got weapons they've looted from Iraq. They've brought them back to Raqqa, as you saw. Our filmmaker was in Raqqa for 3 weeks. American weapons, donutting tanks. He was there for 3 weeks, and he saw how they're establishing a state.
How do they?
Yeah, so the city is Raqqa, and you can see from that video they show that tank doing donuts in the streets, that they have some really heavy weapons. And when I did some clips on ISIS back several weeks ago when they first started taking over large parts of Iraq, I think I showed at least one clip of someone saying that some of Saddam Hussein's former military officers had joined up with some of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq forces, and that may be where they're getting some of their command and control and their strategic initiative from, like, some trained military officers. I didn't see anyone talking about that this morning. But I'm going to show a couple more clips of Kevin Sutcliffe talking about the Vice News reporter. I guess it was 3 weeks he was in Raqqa there, living with ISIS people. And this is a clip of how they enforce their rule when they control an area, in response to a question from Martha Raddatz on ABC this morning here.
How do they hold territory? Do they encircle it? Do they scare everybody? What's going on in these towns where they're holding people in Iraq, like Mosul?
Well, in a town like Raqqa, we filmed religious police walking around enforcing the law. The law is Sharia law, which is very, very hard-line Islamic interpretations. Minor infractions, we see in our film a poster being put up, which is a bit of a Western film poster. The demand is to take it down. Women are told to put hijabs on to cover. This is done at the point of a gun. The religious police are armed, and everybody knows that you'll be going to prison, and a Sharia judge could give you an amazing punishment.
But you...
So that sounds kind of nasty. I mean, I think I showed clips in previous weeks of LiberalViewer Sunday Live clip roundup where people said that ISIS was rejected by Al-Qaeda as too extreme, and they don't sound like the types of, I mean, they're obviously pretty awful people. And I got some comments on some previous videos, like I made a excerpt video of asking whether ISIS was the #1 threat to the U.S. homeland, and I'm going to show some clips of Republicans bringing that up again, saying that ISIS is this huge threat to the U.S. homeland. And when I made that video, I got some comments saying, oh, he's pro-ISIS, and I'm not pro-ISIS. I just think that the threat of ISIS has been hyped a little bit too much by some of the Republicans and even some of the networks. I showed that in that excerpt video, that even was it ABC or NBC? I think it was NBC that was really hyping the threat from ISIS to the U.S. homeland. I mean, the threat to ISIS to Iraq and Syria, I mean, that you don't even really have to hype, and that wasn't what I was saying. And I want to show one more clip from Kevin Sutcliffe. It's pretty short, and I thought this was a little bit chilling about ISIS too, where he was asked by Martha Raddatz what he thought ISIS's reaction to the airstrikes are going to be, and you can see his answer over in this clip.
I think that it's a pinprick over to one side. They've got 30-40% of the territory now. They are expanding, they are expansionist. I think they will welcome the attention that the airstrikes have brought them, the world attention, and I think they have no fear. They're on a mission from God. They're very fundamentalist in their approach, and I think we're just going to see more of this. We're not going to see less. They are on the march.
Very.
So yeah, that's the final clip from Kevin Sutcliffe of Vice News, and that does not sound like good news for anybody. Not good news for Iraq, not even good news for the United States and Western countries who have to deal with this new threat. And in terms of how to deal with it, the one more analysis piece I want to show before I get to the newsmakers, this is kind of the setup to the whole subtext on Fox News coverage on Fox News Sunday this morning of the Iraq issue. The subtext was that what Barack Obama is doing, Mr. Obama, I guess, is doing, the president, that his plan to just do these limited strikes around Irbil and this mountain where the Yazidi Christians are being surrounded by ISIS, that those airstrikes are too limited to really deal with the threat. That was kind of the subtext. And even the host Chris Wallace, he was like emphasizing how the U.S. airstrikes are only taking out like individual artillery pieces, and you can see that in his interaction with their Fox News military analyst, General Jack Keane, retired General Jack Keane, and I'll talk about that a little more after you watch that clip here.
But at this point, we're just taking out individual artillery pieces or convoys or mortars. I mean, this is not any kind of a concerted air campaign.
No, that's a critical point. This is a defensive air strike campaign, largely designed to protect Irbil, U.S. presence, and protect certainly the refugees at Mount Sinjar. It is not taking away ISIS' freedom of movement or its initiative. So you can understand, there are 5 attacks taking place as we speak right now by ISIS. They have total initiative and total freedom of movement. In Kirkuk, they're conducting 2 attacks north of Baghdad, which is here, 80 miles to the north in Tikrit, in this area here. 20 miles to the north in Masad. They were also conducting an attack about 25 miles south of Baghdad in Yusufia, and they're attempting to seize the Haditha Dam here in Anbar province, which is very important to them. So they have freedom of movement, and they have the initiative, except in the area of Irbil and at Mount Sinjar.
So just to button this up, are we rolling back ISIS, or are we just containing them in very limited areas?
We are containing them in very limited areas. To change the nature of this campaign, the president would have to change the orders to the military. That would mean offensive campaign designed to destroy command and control, logistics, and maneuver units. And the operation would change in terms of scale. It would then begin to attack ISIS in multiple locations at the same time.
But we're not.
So yeah, you can see there the Fox News setup, and they'll use that a little bit later when they interview Lindsey Graham about how what President Obama is doing is just limited, and it's not doing enough to roll back ISIS. And then the other conflict between the Democratic and Republican position that gets emphasized, especially on Fox News, is whether there should be a political solution before military action, or whether military action is the way the United States should approach this problem. And President Obama held off on these airstrikes and any kind of military action in Iraq, waiting for there to be a unity government so he wouldn't be getting in the middle of the civil war. Because the big problem in Iraq is that the government of Nouri al-Maliki has kind of excluded the Sunnis, and not even the Kurds, but especially the Sunnis, and that's why the Sunnis have been so willing to join up with this ISIS group, which is a Sunni group, even though it's so totalitarian, as you saw from that Vice News Kevin Sutcliffe discussion. But so the next clip I want to show is one of the chances where Chris Wallace has to confront Lindsey Graham with some of the problems with his analysis, and this is kind of the closest he comes to a confrontational question. He talks about what General Jack Keane, retired General Jack Keane, just described there, but he also asks Lindsey Graham if what the military action is going to solve the problem, and whether President Obama is right that it should really be a political solution, because no matter what the military does, we occupied that country for so long, and so it wasn't a lack of military resources that has caused the problem. It's a lack of them coming together politically, which Chris Wallace does kind of a reasonable job of confronting Lindsey Graham with over in this clip.
Policy of airstrikes and humanitarian airdrops, you sent out this tweet. Let's put it up on the screen. The actions announced tonight will not turn the tide of battle. But President Obama says we can't do that. We can't roll back ISIS, take the offensive measures that General Keane was talking about, until we get an inclusive government in Baghdad so that all of the factions in that country are joining in the fight.
Well, that's not accurate. When I look at the map that General Keane described, I think of the United States. I think of an American city in flames because of the terrorist ability to operate in Syria and Iraq. The Director of National Security, the FBI Director, the Director of Homeland Security has said that the ISIS presence in Syria, where hundreds of Americans and thousands of European fighters have gone, represents a direct threat to the United States. And now their enclave in Iraq. So, Mr. President, you have never once spoken directly to the American people about the threat we face from being attacked from Syria, now Iraq. What is your strategy to stop these people from attacking the homeland? They've expressed a desire to do so. So there's no political reconciliation in Baghdad going to protect the American homeland. That has to be a commander-in-chief with a strategy and a vision. This commander-in-chief has no strategy, he has no vision. This is a situation of where he knows better than everybody else. He was told, you should get engaged in Syria 3 years ago by his national security team. He said no. His military commander said you should leave troops in Iraq as an insurance policy, and he got to know.
So,
well, I'm going to get to that issue that Lindsey Graham raised there at the end about whether President Obama could have left a residual force in Iraq when we pulled out in 2011. But I like how his answer to the question, should there be a political solution before a military solution in Iraq? And his answer was, U.S. city in flames, 9/11. And that's kind of non-responsive answer. And finally, he also said that in the middle there, kind of that President Obama has never told the American people how he's going to deal with the threat from ISIS to the U.S. homeland coming from Iraq and Syria. And I watched the president's news conference yesterday where he specifically addressed that issue and said one of the reasons he's engaging in these airstrikes is because we have a counterterrorism mission to stop ISIS from sending any attacks against the United States. And I actually pulled out the clip of President Obama in that news conference directly contradicting what Lindsey Graham said there, and you can see that over in this clip.
My team has been vigilant even before ISIL went into Mosul about foreign fighters and jihadists gathering in Syria and now in Iraq who might potentially launch attacks outside the region against Western targets and U.S. targets. So there's going to be a counterterrorism element that we are already preparing for and have been working diligently on for a long time now.
So, yeah, Lindsey Graham was not accurate when he said that President Obama has never told the American people what his counterterrorism strategy is for the threat from ISIS coming from Iraq and Syria to the U.S. homeland, because there he said it yesterday in a news conference, and I'm sure that's not the only time he said it, but I don't watch everything President Obama says. I just happen to have watched that press conference, and I'm going to show another clip from Lindsey Graham here over on Fox News Sunday where Chris Wallace kind of, this wasn't a confrontational question, more sort of teeing him up to refute President Obama's claim as to why he's engaging in these limited airstrikes. And you can see Lindsey Graham explaining why he thinks President Obama is engaging this military action over here.
What do you think we're accomplishing with these very targeted, very limited airstrikes against, as I say, an individual artillery piece in Irbil or a specific vehicle outside Mount Sinjar?
A bad news story. He's trying to avoid a bad news story on his watch. This is not a replacement for a strategy to deal with an existential threat to the homeland. To every member of Congress, you've been told by every major intelligence leader in our nation that we're threatened, the homeland's threatened by the presence of ISIL in Iraq and Syria. To change that threat, we have to have a sustained air campaign in Syria and Iraq. We need to go on offense. There is no force within the Mideast that can neutralize or contain or destroy ISIS without at least American air power. Mr. President, be honest with the American people about the threats we face. To the members of Congress who say stop, what is your alternative if we stop to protecting the homeland?
Did you notice at the beginning of that answer from Lindsey Graham that I think he kind of referred to the threat from ISIS against the U.S. homeland as an existential threat, which that doesn't make any sense. An existential threat is a threat to the actual existence of the country. You know, like some people say Israel actually faces existential threats from its Arab neighbors because they could actually destroy Israel, although that, I don't know, Israel has a pretty strong military force. But to think that that the United States faces an existential threat from ISIS, if you go back to the very beginning of Lindsey Graham's answer there, he did use the term existential. It was a little bit ambiguous, but I thought that was kind of ridiculous to... maybe he just misspoke and used the word existential by mistake. And I want to show one more Lindsey Graham clip, and this is sort of confrontational from Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace, but it's not really, as I'll show afterwards, because what he's doing is he's confronting Lindsey Graham with what President Obama said about not leaving a residual force in Iraq in 2011. You know, that's the big critique of President Obama from Dick Cheney and John McCain, and I'm actually going to show John McCain later, and all the Republicans, or almost all the Republicans, say that President Obama decided not to leave any troops in Iraq, and that's why we're having all this trouble. And you can see Chris Wallace asks Lindsey Graham about President Obama's refutation of that in his news conference yesterday, but it only shows like a very tiny clip that doesn't show any of the factual refutation, just shows President Obama calling it bogus and saying that people are using it to cover their own bad decisions about Iraq in the past, which is true, of course, but afterwards I'm going to show the entire 4-minute, 40-second clip of President Obama in his news conference. But first, here's Lindsey Graham answering a question from Chris Wallace that only shows a tiny clip of what President Obama said about why he wasn't wrong to not leave troops in Iraq over in this clip.
Obama bristled Saturday when he was asked about the fact that he had pulled all U.S. troops out and was that responsible for the spread of ISIS. He said, look, it was Iraq that didn't want to make the deal for a carry-on status of forces agreement. Take a look at what the president said.
That entire analysis is bogus and is wrong, but gets frequently peddled around here by folks who oftentimes are trying to defend previous policies that they themselves made.
Question, is that a bogus argument by people who were wrong about Iraq in the first place? I suspect he would suggest you.
The president, yes, and I'm telling the president, you're rewriting history at your own convenience. You got the answer you wanted. You promised to get us out of Iraq, and you were hell-bent to get out of Iraq. And when everybody told you need to leave a force behind, you made it impossible for the Iraqis to say yes. Mr. President, you authored us getting out of Iraq. And during the debate with Governor Romney suggested I could support 10,000 troops like the president intends to leave behind. And the president said in that debate, I'm not leaving any troops behind. I'm not going to get entangled in Iraq yet again. Mr. President, you're rewriting history.
Well, I don't know. I don't really go with that answer from Senator Lindsey Graham. I don't think the president really was rewriting history, and I've heard this argument so often that President Obama is responsible for what's going on in Iraq because he didn't leave a residual force that I actually want to show almost the entire answer that President Obama gave, and it seemed like he really wanted to give this answer because he gave this half-hour news conference all about the strikes in Iraq, and he said, I'm going to take one last question, and someone asked a question about how much it was going to cost, and then he said, I'm going to take one last question again after that, and then he got this question and talked for 5 minutes about why the Republicans are wrong that he is responsible for not leaving this residual force, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show a 4-minute and 40-second clip of President Obama making a strong argument on this topic over here.
Last question.
President, do you have any second thoughts about pulling all ground troops out of Iraq, and does it give you pause as the U.S. is doing the same thing in Afghanistan?
Yeah, you know what I just find interesting is the degree to which this issue keeps on coming up, as if this was my decision. Under the previous administration, we had turned over the country to a sovereign, democratically elected Iraqi government. In order for us to maintain troops in Iraq, we needed the invitation of the Iraqi government, and we needed assurances that our personnel would be immune from prosecution if, for example, they were protecting themselves and ended up getting in a firefight with Iraqis, that they wouldn't be hauled before an Iraqi judicial system. And the Iraqi government, based on its political considerations, in part because Iraqis were tired of a U.S. occupation, declined to provide us those assurances. And on that basis, we left. We had offered to leave additional troops. So when you hear people say, do you regret, Mr. President, not leaving more troops, that presupposes that I would have overridden this sovereign government that we had turned the keys back over to and said, you know what, you're democratic, you're sovereign, except if I decide that it's good for you to keep 10,000 or 15,000 or 25,000 Marines in your country, you don't have a choice. which would have kind of run contrary to the entire argument we were making about turning over the country back to Iraqis. An argument not just made by me, but made by the previous administration. So let's just be clear. The reason that we did not have a follow-on force in Iraq was because the Iraqis were, a majority of Iraqis did not want U.S. troops there. And politically, they could not pass the kind of laws that would be required to protect our troops in Iraq. Having said all that, if in fact the Iraqi government behaved the way it did over the last 5-6 years, where it failed to pass legislation that would reincorporate Sunnis and give them a sense of ownership, if it had targeted certain Sunni leaders and jailed them, if it had alienated some of the Sunni tribes that we had brought back in during the so-called awakening that helped us turn the tide in 2006. If they had done all those things and we had had troops there, the country wouldn't be holding together either. The only difference would be we'd have a bunch of troops on the ground that would be vulnerable. And however many troops we had, we would have to now be reinforcing. I'd have to be protecting them, and we'd have a much bigger job. And probably we would end up having to go up again in terms of the number of ground troops to make sure that those forces were not vulnerable. So that entire analysis is bogus and is wrong, but gets frequently peddled around here by folks who oftentimes are trying to defend previous policies that they themselves made. Going forward with respect to Afghanistan, we are leaving follow-on force there. I think the lesson for Afghanistan is not the fact that we've got a follow-on force that will be capable of training and supporting Afghan security efforts. I think the real lesson in Afghanistan is that if factions in a country, after a long period of civil war, do not find a way to come up with a political accommodation, if they take maximalist positions and their attitude is, I want 100% of what I want and the other side gets nothing, then the center doesn't hold.
Now, despite what some of my viewers sometimes say in the comment section, I don't agree with everything President Obama says, and I'm not like a overall complete defender of President Obama, especially on a lot of civil liberties issues and even on some foreign policy issues, but I actually do agree with pretty much everything he said in that 4-minute, 40-second clip about what happened in his decision, or not really his decision, not to leave residual forces in Iraq, and the whole thing about how there's not going to be a solution unless they have an inclusive government. And I'm not even sure that there is going to be that solution. You know, one of the things I've talked about in some of my previous videos was this idea that maybe the lines drawn at the end of World War I by the French and the English and that secret, what is it, the Sykes-Picot Accord, where they basically divided up the Middle East and drew the lines to their own benefit and not to the benefit of the people who actually lived there, that maybe that all has to be redrawn, you know, in some sort of updated Wilsonian principles. I even talked about how Wilson talked about the rights of the Kurds to have self-determination in his 14 points. If you read Wilson's 14 points, he specifically mentions the right of the Kurds to have their autonomy from the Turkish Empire. But anyway, having shown all those Fox News Sunday Chris Wallace clips with Lindsey Graham kind of teeing him up to attack President Obama and not really confronting him with the full force of what you could confront Lindsey Graham with in terms of his flawed analysis, I at least want to show they did give the Democrat senator they had on, Senator Ben Cardin, they gave him an opportunity to refute what Lindsey Graham said, at least not with the same amount of time, but at least want to show that Fox News gave a Democrat a chance to respond to what Lindsey Graham said over in this clip.
Senator Cardin, you just heard Senator Graham and his very strong opinions. What's your reaction?
I have a great deal of respect for Senator Graham. I just disagree with him. I agree with the president. There is not a U.S. military solution to this issue. We have a very limited mission that the president has authorized to deal with the humanitarian crisis, to avoid a genocide, and I support that mission. We're protecting U.S. interests as far as the safety of U.S. personnel in the northern part of Iraq. That's our limited mission, but we're not going to use our military to take care of what the Iraqis should be taking care of. And if you're looking at what the real cause here, the real cause is that the Iraqi government has not performed the way it should to protect the rights of all Iraqis. We are not going to get in the middle of a civil war and use American military where it should be Iraqis taking care of their own needs.
So Fox News did at least give a Democratic senator a chance to give his point of view, and I'm going to show one more clip from Ben Cardin later, but I want to show a clip from CBS, and not to completely pick on Fox News. I want to show CBS's Bob Schieffer had on another Democratic senator, Jack Reed, and he talked about that clip I showed of President Obama defending his decision or non-decision about leaving U.S. troops, residual forces in Iraq. And Bob Schieffer actually did kind of what Fox News did, with not really quoting President Obama's whole argument, and then kind of undercutting what President Obama was saying by referring to him, bragging about getting all the troops out of Iraq. And you can see Bob Schieffer doing that on CBS this morning with Democratic Senator Jack Reed over in this clip.
Iraq. Here's part of what his response was.
What I just find interesting is the degree to which this issue keeps on coming up, as if this was my decision.
And those words were hardly out of the president's mouth when we started getting calls from Republicans who said, hey, wait a minute. Back in 2011, President Obama was taking credit for pulling those troops out of Iraq and was saying that he was fulfilling his campaign promise. Do you see any connection, Senator, between the pulling out of the American troops there and what has happened in Iraq since then?
Well, first thing I think you have to recognize that the invasion of Iraq back in 2003 was, I think, a strategic miscalculation. And at the time, I opposed it because I didn't think in the long run it would contribute to long-term security. In fact, it would have long-term and detrimental consequences. We're living with those consequences today. And in 2008, it was President George W. Bush and Prime Minister Maliki who agreed that all American forces would leave Iraq in 2011. Now, some people have said, well, President Obama could have negotiated around that in the intervening years. But once President Bush and President Maliki had declared that our forces, all of them, would be out, it was very difficult, although President Obama tried to have a remaining force there, training, equipping, along the lines of what we're proposing in Afghanistan. But I think once that decision was made in 2008, our troops were leaving in 2011. Has it contributed to the situation here? I think what's contributed significantly to the situation has not been our presence or lack of presence. It's been the politics of Maliki, his alienation of the Sunni community, his politicization of the military. The collapse at Mosul was not a result of lack of equipment or lack of personnel. It was leadership collapse. And so in order to put the situation right, we have to begin at the fundamental core, which is leadership in Baghdad, Iraqi leadership, which will work together in a unified way to defend and protect their country and defeat ISIS.
And again, like I said, I do agree with what President Obama said, and it was kind of echoed there by Senator Jack Reed, that basically it's not a lack of military force that caused this problem with ISIS in Iraq. It's a lack of political solution to the different factions, and especially Nouri al-Maliki not bringing in the Sunnis into his government. And I also, having shown those defenses, I want to show, and having shown how Fox News let Senator Lindsey Graham attack President Obama on his Iraq policy. I want to show how there were Republicans both on CNN and NBC also attacking President Obama, and also especially attacking him on his failure to leave troops in Iraq, and of course his failure to take stronger action. And of course one of those Republicans has to be Senator John McCain. He was over on CNN's State of the Union with Candy Crowley, and there's this clip I'm not going to show where she actually asked him about or talked about the comments that Candy Crowley talked about, the comments she gets about, why is Senator John McCain on your program so much? And she said, it's because you give us straight answers and you articulate a position. And I thought that was kind of funny. But what I'm going to show you here is John McCain, doing his predictable attack on Obama. Oh, and that was the thing that Candy Crowley asked him in the clip I'm not going to show, was like, is there anything President Obama does that you don't attack? And he gave some examples, but I'm not going to show that clip. I'm going to show his predictable attack on President Obama, and specifically his attack on President Obama for not leaving troops in Iraq, and for creating a leadership vacuum, and of course not blaming President George W. Bush for creating the leadership vacuum by deposing Saddam Hussein. But anyway, here's Senator John McCain talking to Candy Crowley on CNN's State of the Union this morning here.
Well, obviously, when the President of the United States proudly announced that the last combat troop was out of Iraq, that, by the way, it's not a matter of whether, it's a matter of when Bashar Assad will be leaving power, and all those other statements about how the conflict is winding down, all of which have turned out to be false, because there's a vacuum of American leadership all throughout the Middle East, not just look at the Israeli Hamas situation and others. But the fact is that there's no leadership, and decisions have consequences. And the consequences of our failure to leave a residual force and our announcement that we are leaving the area and a vacuum of leadership, especially in that part of the world, we are paying a price for it. And we could have avoided it, and it is not inevitable. It's not like an earthquake or a hurricane. These things happen because of decisions that are made. And again, I don't view the president stating that he's protecting American troops and trying to prevent a humanitarian crisis as an intervention that will have any effect whatsoever on the activity. ISIS in the last few weeks, while we've been waiting for a change from Maliki, they now control the two major dams in Iraq. They have the possibility of flooding parts of the country and cutting off energy. Meanwhile, ISIS is moving towards Irbil. I mean, this is a cataclysm. This is a possibility of a cataclysmic scenario, and the president says that he's going to protect American troops and try to prevent humanitarian disasters. That's the extent of his policy. There is no policy, and so therefore there's no strategy. So therefore, things are going very, very badly.
So that's Senator John McCain on CNN giving his strong opinion that President Obama is not doing a good job in the Middle East, and especially not doing a good job in Iraq. And there's a lot of I told you so's there that maybe aren't quite deserved based on John McCain's position on the initial invasion of Iraq. But I don't want to just pick on CNN. I also want to show over on NBC, they had a Republican, that was Senator John McCain. This is Peter King, a Republican congressman from New York, from House of Representatives. He was on NBC's Meet the Press with David Gregory, and he had similar criticisms of President Obama, specifically President Obama's failure to leave residual troops in Iraq and to have strong leadership. And you can hear some of the same talking points you heard from Senator John McCain over in this clip.
Well, first of all, we should take nothing off the table. We start off with massive air attacks. I think doing them from aircraft carriers is limiting them. We should use bases in the area so we can have much more sustained air attacks. We should be aggressively arming the Kurds. The president says that once there's a unity government in Iraq, we will then fight alongside and work with the Iraqi army. Start doing that now. Why wait months and months before the Iraqi government is back in place? Every day that goes by, ISIS builds up in strength. Well, with whatever you do as commander-in-chief, you never, ever tell the enemy what you're not going to do. What you're not going to do. You shouldn't even tell them what you are going to do.
But a lot of people listening to this, Congressman, hear you and they say, wait a minute, we invaded this country. We took over the country. We occupied the country. We had massive troop levels there, armaments, military hardware that's being used by ISIS now. This is Iraq's responsibility. Why can't or why won't Iraq deal with this threat that is a grave threat to its future?
First of all, let's put this in perspective. What was done in Iraq, as President Obama and Vice President Biden said, turned out to be a significant achievement, a great achievement. Iraq was stable. Iraq was a unified government. It was when President Obama withdrew all the American troops, when our troops that were embedded with the Iraqi troops were taken away. That's when the Iraqi army started to disintegrate, when we lost control over Maliki because we withdrew. That's what started. There's no reason why Iraq would not have worked. The president, he started this. He started this downfall in 2011. With the direct withdrawal of American troops. So
yeah, Representative Peter King, I like the part there where he says it's because we lost control of Nouri al-Maliki, the prime minister. Like, is that what sovereignty of Iraq is supposed to mean? That the United States is supposed to control the prime minister, who actually has a lot more strong ties to Iran, which I think is what upsets Congressman Peter King from New York there. And he basically had most of the Republican talking points there about, President Obama what he's doing is too limited, not extensive enough in terms of the airstrikes, and then also that he's putting political solutions first when there should be a military solution first, and then the talking point about not leaving the residual force in Iraq. I guess the only talking point that was missing was the whole bringing in 9/11 attacks on the homeland, but of course Peter King wouldn't fail to do that, would he? So I'll show you an additional clip from NBC's Meet the Press. Peter King also fitting in the 9/11 talking point when and it's kind of a non-responsive answer to, like, what are your better alternatives that you can see over in this clip.
Welcome. Thanks, David.
You heard Jim's reporting there.
First of all,
just the member of the House Homeland Security Committee. And Congressman, welcome. Let me challenge you in a different way.
Sure.
Which is those who would argue, conservatives, Republicans, others, that the president has underestimated this, is only using limited action to fight this threat. What more can be done, as the president said, than just keep a lid on this problem and all of these threats by the United States?
Well, first of all, David, this is not just Iraq. ISIS is a direct threat to the United States of America. And what Dick Durbin just said and what President Obama have said is really a shameful abdication of American leadership. This isn't Iraq we're talking about. We can't wait for Maliki or the Iraqi parliament to fight ISIS. Every day that goes by, ISIS builds up this caliphate, and it becomes a direct threat to the United States of America. They are more powerful now than Al-Qaeda was on 9/11. So Dick Durbin says, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. I want to hear what he says when they attack us in the United States. I lost hundreds of constituents on 9/11. I never want to do that again. We see this coming. And so for the president to say, we're doing airstrikes, we're not doing anything else, we're not going to use American combat troops, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, what kind of leadership is that?
So,
you should never let the enemy know what you're going to do.
Well, let's...
So I guess I showed the Representative Peter King clip there before showing the Senator Dick Durbin clip, although I almost showed it by mistake there because I actually meant to show Peter King before Dick Durbin, even though Peter King was referring to what Dick Durbin said, because I just wanted to show his, like, going to 9/11 and Dick Durbin has to explain to my constituents when they're, like, in flames, or that's not exactly what he said, but basically what he said. And I want to contrast what you saw from the Republicans here. I mentioned earlier in the broadcast I was going to show a real difference between Republicans and Democrats. Well, the Republicans are, like, all upset that President Obama hasn't done more, hasn't done it sooner. I'm going to show now Dick Durbin, and then and this is from Meet the Press, and then in a minute I'll show Ben Cardin again from Fox News Sunday. Both of them are really insistent that what President Obama does in Iraq be limited. And I think I was saying earlier that President Obama really didn't want to take any military action until there was a political unification of Iraq, if that's even possible. And it basically means getting rid of Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, although I actually heard some breaking news that I haven't, right before I started the show, that there's some curfew in Baghdad and maybe Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki isn't going to give up power and something bad's going to happen. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to talk about that next week. But I'm going to show how these two Democrats are actually pushing for limits on what President Obama does. And they were kind of persuaded, kind of like President Obama was, that they had to do something limited to stop this genocide of the Yazidi Christians on that mountaintop, and then also to help the Kurds in the north, but not the more extensive campaign that you saw Fox News was advocating in almost every way. And here's this is Senator Dick Durbin over on Meet the Press talking about how he wants to keep things limited, talking to David Gregory in this clip.
Senator, welcome.
Thanks, David.
You heard Jim's reporting there, and just the goals here: preventing genocide, stopping ISIS, protecting the Kurdish territory, protecting really the integrity of Iraq and American personnel on the ground. All of those goals, so important. Why are you already talking about limits to this operation?
Because only Iraq can save Iraq. The president has stepped in because of this threatened genocide. I support that. Bringing food and water to these people who are dying on that mountaintop, of course the United States should do that. And when it comes to the Kurds, yes, they have been the adults in this neighborhood, the grown-ups. And I think that we ought to help them preserve their capital against this ISIS invasion. And we also want to make certain that the Americans that are on the ground are protected. The bottom line is this: there is so much that we can do to help the Iraqis help themselves. But ultimately, they have to save their own country.
But talk about...
So you can see that the Democratic senator from Illinois there, Dick Durbin, does not want this limited military action with the airstrikes right around Irbil and to get the food to the Yazidi Christians who are trapped on that mountaintop. That's all he wants the president to do. And I'm going to show you over on Fox News Sunday, Senator Ben Cardin actually says that even if Iraq got itself together and had a unity government, he still wouldn't want any more military action. And so I think that really distinguishes him from maybe even some other Democrats, and certainly from the Republicans. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show you, let me see, that is clip number 26 here.
Now, the president is talking about getting drawn in if you get an inclusive government in Baghdad, if Maliki steps down and you get buy-in from the Shiites and the Kurds and the Sunnis. One, would you support that? And two, what do you make of the fact that they were supposed to, by the Constitution, the parliament was supposed to meet today to choose a prime minister, and they couldn't even agree to do that?
Well, no, I'm not going to. I would not support drawing American troops in to do what the Iraqis have to do for themselves. I would oppose that. I do support this humanitarian mission. I think the president is right. The Iraqis look at America as being able to help prevent a genocide, and we should do that, working with the international community. We have a game plan in that regard. What we will not do is become the Iraqi Air Force, as the president has said. And obviously, we've got to be extremely concerned that we're not drawn into that type of military action.
Yeah, but
Sorry for the delay there. I thought that was an interesting comment from Senator Ben Cardin, that there are some Democrats who, even if there is a unity government with the Sunnis being brought in by Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, that they still wouldn't support more military action. And I mean, there's still a big peace wing of the Democratic Party, which I think is my point I was trying to make, is that differentiates it from the Republican Party, although there is a growing non-interventionist wing there as well. But I don't know, I haven't heard what Rand Paul's reaction to what President Obama did in Iraq in the last week. That might be interesting. Maybe I'll be able to find that out by next week. But I also want to show you one more clip on the Iraq situation before I get to my last couple clips on Ebola. This is actually not from a newsmaker. This is a reporter who interviewed Senator Hillary Clinton, or former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and got her to differentiate herself from the Obama administration's foreign policy. And unlike the two clips I just showed of Senator Ben Cardin and Senator Dick Durbin, this seems to be an expression of a more hawkish wing of the Democratic Party, or at least Hillary Clinton is trying to show that she was more hawkish than President Obama on Syria, and she thinks if President Obama had been more hawkish that on Syria, that they might have stamped out ISIS before it became a problem in Iraq. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that final clip on the whole Iraq story. This is NBC's Meet the Press talking, NBC's David Gregory on Meet the Press talking to reporter for The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, about his interview with Hillary Clinton that just came out this morning in the magazine The Atlantic. And I'll talk about that a little more if you see it here.
Of these issues, including Syria. Now, we know that she disagreed with the administration. She wanted to support Syrian rebels. Here's what she told you in part in this interview that's on The Atlantic, or in The Atlantic this morning. This is Secretary Clinton, former Secretary Clinton, speaking to you. I know that the failure to help build up a credible fighting force of the people who were the originators of the protest against Assad, there were Islamists, there were secularists, there was everything in the middle. The failure to do that left a big vacuum which the jihadis have now filled. That's the most criticism of the president she worked for that we've ever heard.
That's pretty blunt. I think this week she feels, and people are around her, supporters of Hillary and supporters of intervention, feel like she's been vindicated by events. It's impossible to know. Of course, it's impossible to know whether U.S. intervention in Syria 3 years ago.
I mean, the president says that's a fantasy to believe.
The president says it's a fantasy. Hillary Clinton obviously says it's not a fantasy. We'll never know. These are counterfactuals. You can break your head over. On the other hand, it's pretty obvious that by staying on the sidelines, not only the U.S. but the entire West allowed what became ISIS to fill a vacuum. I think what she's saying there is reasonable analysis, and obviously these are questions going forward that she's obviously beginning a process of maybe distancing herself from some of the policies she disagreed with, and in this interview with me, I think she went a little bit further than she usually has in distancing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, but it's actually kind of disturbing for me as someone who generally supports the Democratic candidate to see that the most likely frontrunner to be the presidential candidate in 2016 is moving to the right of President Obama on foreign policy, or becoming more hawkish, and that makes me disturbed because I would kind of like a foreign policy more to the left of President Obama, but I don't see anyone who's going to take up that cause within the Democratic Party for 2016 if Hillary Clinton is sort of the prohibitive favorite to be the I don't know. I guess there's still time. If she goes too far to the right on that and on NSA spying and on being too close to Wall Street, I mean, that seems like almost inviting some kind of challenge from the left, but I don't know who it would be. I don't think it's going to be Elizabeth Warren, but anyway, I wanted to show you that clip, and you can let me know what you think, both about Hillary Clinton moving to the right of President Obama on Syria, and that the interview in The Atlantic was before this story about, before President Obama's decision to order airstrikes in Iraq, so it didn't include that, but you can let me know what you think about the whole Iraq situation. Before I get to some of your live comments, which I've been reading as I go along, I'm going to show last couple clips on Ebola, which was covered just a little bit on the shows, not as ignored as Gaza, or certainly immigration in Ukraine were completely ignored. Gaza was mostly ignored. Ebola was covered on a couple different shows. But the questions did have a lot to do with something Bill Maher was talking about in his monologue, not last Friday, but the Friday before, in a clip I've already showed. But I want to set up this clip I'm going to show you from CBS's Face the Nation and Bob Schieffer. But I want to set it up with what Bill Maher said is what really interests people in the United States when they look to their media about the Ebola outbreaks in Africa over in this clip.
No, not that, come on, we don't have reason to be concerned. We do. I mean, Doctors Without Borders say it is out of control in West Africa, and Americans want to know two things. One, are Bono and George Clooney safe? And two, will this be affecting any countries with white people? Right. Oh,
no. So I didn't hear anything about George Clooney or Bono, but I did hear multiple questions about whether the Ebola virus had any chance of affecting countries where there are white people, not that explicitly, but as an example, I'm going to show CBS's Face the Nation, Bob Schieffer talking to a doctor from the World Health Organization. His name is Keiji Fukuda, I think, Keiji Fukuda. And you can see Bob Schieffer's question and his answer kind of conforming to Bill Maher's paradigm over in this clip.
Dr. Fukuda, let me ask you this, because I think a lot of people are worried about it. Are you confident that this disease won't spread from Africa to Europe and then into North America?
You know, Bob, I think there's two important points to make here. One of them is that in this modern period, this globalized world we live in, it's clear that any person can travel anywhere in the world with an infection. But it's also important to know, in terms of this disease and this outbreak, this in many ways is a poster child for what it means to have health systems which are weak. That means that the surveillance systems are not strong, there may not be enough healthcare workers, and so on. So I think that while it is possible for someone with an infection to travel to a number of countries, perhaps in Europe, perhaps to North America like the United States, and it's possible that you may have some few cases associated with that, few infections, I think that in those countries which really have good health systems, good health professionals, good surveillance systems, it's very unlikely that you would have large outbreaks in the way that we're seeing them in these countries right now.
So that seemed like a pretty good answer to what was, I don't know, was it a Euro white-centric question, a question that was centered on, is this going to hurt white people? I don't know, you can let me know in the comments section, because I'm going to try to do, I was going to try to finish the show by 8 o'clock, which is just a couple of minutes away, but I have been reading your comments along the way, and I even did a couple quick captures of a couple comments. First, let me put this one up. This is a comment from JRM102, political stability, which is, I didn't quite get the context of that comment, but it reminded me of one of the discussions I saw amongst the pundits. I can't remember exactly which ones. I don't normally take clips from pundits, but there was a discussion amongst the pundits about what President Obama has started in his presidency was he wanted democracy first and then try to get stability, and this is a decision that presidents often make, but then now he's kind of learning he has to get stability first and then worry about democracy after, and it's kind of a tension in U.S. foreign policy. So I don't know if that's what JRM was talking about with that political stability comment. And then one more comment I took a screen capture from. Let me put that up. This is from NO8549. What about the Kurds in Turkey? Probably we won't have a Kurdistan because Turks won't allow that. And yeah, that's actually something I mentioned in my commentary before. And I even saw some people talking about Kurdistan and this U.S. support. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes between the United States and Turkey, but I don't think there can be an independent Kurdistan without causing a huge rift between the United States and Turkey, because there are so many Kurds in Turkey and Turkey doesn't want to give them independence. So yeah, I think that's an important comment. And let's see, at my broadcast time it's like 7:59, so I need to kind of finish up. Let me see if I can find like one more comment that I didn't get a capture from about one of these topics. I see Joe Blow says moderate Muslims in the Middle East outnumber ISIS 1,000 to 1. If you lose land to them, it's your own fault. Well, hopefully that's true. Hopefully ISIS won't be able to get the support of the indigenous people, though I did see one analyst saying that they are really good at getting the support of indigenous Sunnis, but I guess only time will tell on that. And I guess speaking of time, I'm out of time. My show is at almost an hour and a half, and I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out. I appreciated was around 100 people at some point, so I think it peaked at over 100 at one point, those of you who joined me. I wanted to let you know that I do have an edited produced video that I've announced on previous shows, almost done, should be up on Tuesday. The title of that edited produced video is Fox News Attacks Atheists Fighting Tax-Exempt Church Electioneering ? And that will be done before Tuesday, but won't have time to upload it probably till Tuesday night. So look for that. And LiberalViewer Sunday, a live clip roundup. We'll be back next Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, hopefully promptly. I was pretty prompt today. And like I said, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out. I hope for my U.S. and other North American and South American viewers, it ended your week or weekend with a little more information about what's going on and some of the things the U.S. corporate media focused on. And for those of you who are already starting your weeks in Europe and around the world, I hope I helped you start your week with a little bit more of that same information. And I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.